Hello and welcome back to the Vein of YouTube channel, where every video gets progressively worse and worse as you keep on watching. Today I will be going over 3 of probably the most popular building techniques used on Roblox. I will mostly go over how everything is put together, not necessarily the asset building / modeling, etc. If you want to see a full video on how I made the low poly asset, which you will see in this video, then I have a video already posted on the channel about the top 10 most important low poly assets that you can make. Now, first things first, I will be hopping into Roblox Studio, where I will be beginning to make the classic style of building on Roblox, which you will see in countless games. Usually the games that are like 3 a.m., don't wake up grandma at 3 a.m., don't go to the bathroom at 3 a.m., don't do anything at 3 a.m., the toilet monster experience, the monster toilet simulator. And when I said I wouldn't explain how I go into individually making each asset, but I will show the process of making each of the assets just in a very non-descriptive way compared to when I put things together. So I want to go through how the whole video will take place, the rules, and all of my requirements and stuff like that. So I will be making 11 assets total for each of the styles of building. So I will have a waterfall, a rock, a mushroom, an oak tree, a mountain thingy, which is what I call it. I don't really know. They're like barriers or whatever. Pine tree, a fence, a sign, which I won't use that much. Tall grass, or just a grass variant, a lamppost, and finally a bridge. And you will see me making those 11 assets throughout each building style. Now, another thing to notice is that once I get onto the realistic assets, I'm actually using free models. This is probably going to be like the first video and probably the last video where I use free models, because I am heavily against using free models, but I do not want to make high poly assets. And most games that do use high poly assets are all free modeled. Now, one difficult thing to note is that usually these free models that you find are like giant asset packs. So it's going to be really difficult for me to try to use only 11 of them compared to the hundreds that they give you, which people are really good at usually putting together. Now, another thing I want to state is that I'm going to try and make each scene look really similar in like the shape and where all the trees and stuff go. But I want to really like show the difference between each building style and how you can make even just 11 assets look really good. Now, when I was making this higher poly asset pack, as much as those giant mega asset packs that I got from the toolbox was useful, I still had to look up a couple extra ones, and I did have to make my own, which was this fence that you are looking at right now. You can also see me getting a random stop sign from the toolbox, because realistically I'm not going to use the signs in any way possible because I don't really think they're necessary whatsoever. And all that I did now is just put each of these asset packs into a folder, make them into a bigger folder, and then just copy and pasted them into a separate place so I can organize it that way and not have it in my test world. So now we are finally getting into the putting stuff together and the building part. Now, what I wanted to do for the classic building style is have a 100 by 100 stud map, as well as keeping myself in one stud snapping. I also was limiting myself to only being able to do 90-degree rotation. I also wasn't allowed to scale models. So what I'm starting to do is make a kind of river. I wanted to have a river for each of them. That's kind of why I built a bridge. So one thing I do want to state, if you're wondering how to make each part have studs and look like they're using classic studs, you actually need to get a plugin for this, or you need to change the surface properties via using like the command bar or whatever it's called. I've never tried doing that, so I really don't know if that's how you do it. I just use a plugin. I'll have the link to the plugin in the description. It's called the Resurface Plugin if you're wondering and just want to look it up via that. Another thing that I was really curious about is that if I was going to make the water be a solid non-transparent part, or if it was going to be a transparent part. I decided to go with transparent. I also raised and lowered some of the mountain barriers just so I can add a little bit more detail. I'm also going to eventually change the colors later. And for the waterfall, I think I did a pretty good use of it. I did have to change the size of the waterfall just a little bit. So at this point, I'm adding in the trees. Now I was also experimenting if I wanted to keep shadows on or off. I wanted to keep it to be somewhat modern classic Roblox. So I kept shadows on, and I think I liked it better. If you want it to look like less good, I guess. I don't really know how to explain it. Then I guess turn the shadows off for all of them. It's like the cast shadow property. Or you can also just do compatibility in the lighting section of the Explorer, whatever you call it, instead of shadow map, which is what I did. So now I'm just adding the simple details like rocks and mushrooms and the tall grass. I was also really confused on where to put these fences, but I just decided, you know what, fine, put them by the waterfall. Now, this is where the cannot scale rule really hit me, which was with the bridge, I had to rescale like all of it individually, moving each piece, because I had to keep it in one stud, which meant I had to remove the bridge and scale it differently because it was too small in the first place. And lastly, I just put some of the lanterns around, or the lampposts, whatever you call them, and that ended up being the final scene. And finally, I just added a surface GUI and then added a text label in there and decided to name it Bricklandia. Don't steal that name. Don't make a game called Bricklandia. I will sue you. Joking. I don't care. Now we are moving on to the low poly asset map, which is probably my favorite one because I made all these assets. And I'm just copying over the Bricklandia base plate that I had, and I am actually scaling it to be even bigger because the ground that I made is way too small. So I actually decided to make it 200 by 200 for the low poly map. You'll also see that the high poly map is also going to be 200 by 200. I think it actually works out fine because it scales to the player much better. And some of the rules that I used for this one is that I could go to 0.25 studs for each of them, and I'm able to actually scale the models, which was really, really nice. I'm also able to rotate each model. Now, the first thing I'm adding is actually a waterfall, and I'm just changing settings right now and doing whatnot. Now, for the water, the difficult part of all of it was actually I had to make another beam, and I had to do a bunch of settings just to make it look good. I used the same texture that I did for the waterfall. So then I decided to figure out where I had to put the bridge and just add the mountains. Added some trees, added some rocks, added the mushrooms. Now I actually named this one Pollination because I thought pollination, which is like the flowers crap, I don't know what bees do. No, that's not. I don't know, something like that. I'm not that smart. And it had poly, like low poly, and like, you know, nation. I thought I was really smart for creating this, okay? I thought it was cool. It kind of seems stupid to me now. So now we are moving on to the high poly, the realistic, the ultra realistic scene that you'll be seeing. Now this one was really difficult for me to like make and understand how to use because again, I only have 11 assets that I'm able to use for this. And most of these ultra realistic scenes that you see on Roblox and those showcases have multiple assets that they're able to use because the free models come with huge asset numbers, like hundreds, and 11 is not that crazy. So having to use the mountain thingies in a way where it's not like one individual color, because I cannot change the color of these meshes, which I tried to do, didn't really work that well, kind of sucked. Now, the rules that have in place for this one is that I'm able to go literally any setting. But believe it or not, I am starting with the terrain editor, which I have very strong opinions about the terrain editor, and I will talk about them in a video coming up soon. Now we're getting on to using the mountain thingies and the waterfall. The waterfall actually worked out really well, which I actually liked with it, but the mountain thingies, this was the difficult part because I had to make it so it looked seemingly good without making it look like a single color and having no detail whatsoever. So what I decided to do is rotate certain parts of it so it's like a different face of the texture. Now for this one, I decided to put a lot more trees than the last one because I kind of wanted to block out some of the mistakes I guess that I made. I also had the mushrooms and the rocks. The scene ended up looking pretty fine. It wasn't anything too crazy and it wasn't anything too complicated. Once the lighting got put in though, it was beautiful, and you'll see me doing that in the next part. And this one, I had no idea what to name it, to be honest, so I just called it Real. Yeah. So now we get to go on to my favorite part of doing this, which was changing the lighting. Now, I won't go into specifics on how I did everything, but for the low poly map, I wanted to go for like a nostalgic, very saturated, and kind of like a, you know, like when you're younger and everything looks a bit brighter and more colorful. That's kind of what I wanted it to look like. So that's what I did. But once everything was good, I organized everything and went into a playtest. And you'll see right now how everything looks. Now, I want to go through the stats of this and what I really liked about this map. Number one, it took me about 2 hours to make. It was actually, believe it or not, the longest map to make because I had such limited places where I had to put everything and I had to resize a lot of this stuff. In general, it took 2 hours to make the assets and the map combined. So it was actually really nice. If I would turn this into a game, 2 hours is a really good time. So this map was pretty easy to make. I think the only thing I would change is probably just the lights and maybe add a different skybox. But other than that, I think it looked pretty great in the end. Now, the sunlight, I always thought that this setting in the lighting section of the Explorer never did anything, but it's just because for some reason it doesn't do anything until you're in an actual playtest. So that's the classic map in all of its glory. I think it looked pretty great, and I will definitely make more maps like this in the future. I do have a little bit of experience with making these maps. They're not really that difficult to make in general. So there you have it. Now next, I'm moving on to the low poly map and changing the lighting for this. What I really noticed is that for some reason, the water was extremely bright, and that's because the settings I had for the low poly map made it super saturated and vibrant, so you can see the neon colors that the water gave up and the light emission, because I thought the light emission would make it look more cartoony. And for this map, I really didn't want to go into anything crazy for colors and whatnot, so I just made a lot more saturation and changed a good deal of the colors. Eventually my footage froze, which kind of sucked. Once I got the footage back up and running, I just went into another playtest and walked around, and it looked pretty good. So there you have it. That's the low poly map, and I think again it looked really, really good. Now, one thing I will critique about it is that there is a lot of open space, but I think I could have added like smaller grass, again a different skybox, and low poly features like flowers or stuff like that. But if you watched my last video, you'll know that I am not that good at making flowers whatsoever. But one thing I did like about this map compared to the classic map is that everything looked a bit more like plastic look and more cartoony in my opinion than the classic map. But the last thing I would critique about it is that for some reason the water did not just flow like it should. Not how it would normally flow. I could have fixed it, but I'm too lazy, and I think it worked out fine. The map in total took me about 1.5 hours to put together everything, but to make all the assets, it took me probably 5 hours total. And again, the sunlight did not get fixed. I'm so mad about that, but worked out fine. So next we get onto the real map, or whatever I called it. I don't know. the realistic or higher poly map. And this was the funnest one to change the lighting for, especially since I wanted to make it look kind of dark and gloomy, kind of like a real world. So I already figured out where I wanted to put the sun, and I tried to turn down saturation just a little bit, just to make it look a bit less vibrant compared to all the low poly maps. And I think actually the finished product looked really, really good. I just had to change the sunlight again. But for the map being ultra realistic with the 11 assets that I used, it looked extremely good. And Roblox water is the most amazing thing ever. I don't know what they did with the water to make it look so good, but Roblox water is the greatest thing ever. Now, one thing I will say, which I think Roblox should also fix, is that the sunlight doesn't really affect your player, but it affects your camera, which means that it'll go through the bushes, but it won't really impact the player that much, and like the lines going onto your player, which I think should be changed in my opinion. Again, I needed to change the sunlight a lot, but the fact that the sunlight would go through the meshes of the bushes that well was quite impressive. And again, my footage froze, which was quite annoying. Now the high poly map I actually think looked way better than I thought it would. I would turn probably the sunlight down a little bit because the sun was a bit bright. The water looked amazing. The lantern, or the lamp, looked really good too, with the light actually correctly influencing everything. And I used the future lighting style thing, whatever you call it, instead of shadow map. So I think it looked really, really good in the end, especially for the fact that I had only 11 assets to make this map. They were all free models except for the fence, but it looked really good and I enjoyed it. I think the only thing that I would really change is actually having more assets. And as it was a rule and something I didn't really want to change in this challenge, I think I did pretty good for myself and it looked, yeah, pretty good. This is the first time I did a voiceover rather than just putting in my random takes and random words that I randomly say in my other videos. This is also the first video where I don't have subtitles going all the way through the video. If you do want me to have subtitles through the video completely, then tell me and I will. The reason I don't have them throughout this video is because, truthfully, they take 7 hours to make every single individual one of those subtitles, and it kind of sucks. I do not like doing it. This was kind of a experimental video, and I kind of just wanted to see what I can do. My final verdict is that if you are a beginner in Roblox, I recommend making classic games. If you are a bit more advanced, believe it or not, I recommend you making the low poly asset pack. And if you are kind of in the middle, or if you're advanced in general, if you're extremely advanced, you would make every single one of the assets for the high poly map. I'm not extremely advanced, believe it or not, so I just use Toolbox, sadly. But if you're intermediate, I recommend using that and just kind of putting things together. It gets your brain moving on where everything should go. It's pretty calming to do, especially if you have like music in the background. So there you have it. If you enjoyed this video, I appreciate it, and I will see you later.